Hello and a warm welcome to In Your Money. I'm Bryan Hirsch, and this evening we are going to focus on investments. Joining this evening is David Shapiro, Chief Global Equity Strategist at Sasfin Wealth, joining us in his pajamas from the early hours of New York. Good morning, David. It's lovely to have you on the show, and thank you for waking up at such an unkind hour. I particularly enjoyed the quote you sent me over the weekend, and I'll share it with our viewers. A Turkish proverb, what reads, "When a clown moves into a palace, he does not become king. The palace instead becomes a circus." Quite the image, David, and very telling. Let's dive into that. David, I'm going to put up some slides first, and I want to talk about fear and greed. I want to illustrate what happens when fundamentals and sentiment are completely out of sync. The first slide just reflects when sentiment and fundamentals are in sync, markets move up. The second slide shows very simply when there's negativity, both fundamentally and sentiment, markets move down. But the next slide reflects what's happening at the moment. You've got terrible volatility in the markets, and you've got maybe sentiment and fundamentals being completely out of sync, and that's where you get the dangers in markets. I'll come back to that in a moment, but I'd also like to just put up a slide which reflects all the major happenings that have caused world markets to fall, and I'm going back 85 years. And I hope our viewers can see the slide, but it talks very much what has happened with the world wars and all the things that have happened, and it reflects very simply, the first thing is what has happened to markets when we've had this reaction, how the markets then responded 22 days later and possibly 63 days later. The patterns are fascinating. And so my first question to you, David, how would you rate this event, firstly, from an emotive point of view to previous events? And I mean, you know, people are emotively, they think the world's coming to an end. Yeah. When COVID was there, they felt likewise. Yeah. So emotively, and then how would you rate this event in terms of the long-term effects on economies and companies we're invested in?
Well, this is man-made. This is a self-inflicted wound. If you look at all those other collapses that we've had, there was some event, COVID. We didn't know about this virus and what the impact was going to be. We closed the world. The whole world closed. If you look at the financial crisis in 2008 and 2009, you know, this was a financial crisis from over-borrowing and over-lending. There was reason for this. This crisis, there's absolutely no reason for this crisis at all. This is man-made by one person, President Trump, who will not listen to any reason. Bryan, I must say that if I had to relate it to anything, this is like, for me, this is like COVID. Why do I say that? And why do I relate it to that? Is that because in COVID, we closed down the world. We disrupted supply chains. We disrupted the world order. This, in my view, is what Trump is trying to do. He's trying to remake the world economic order in one day, you know, in 2 days. So I just want to just share your thoughts. Yes, he had merit in trying to rebalance some of the trade agreements with other countries. Yeah, yes, there was merit in the view that America was, people were treating them unfairly. But you can't, you can't suddenly say overnight, we're going to change it. Because so many American companies, global companies, have to review their supply chains and say, okay, if you're going to increase tariffs, give us time to kind of reposition ourselves. You can't do it overnight, and you can't do it like he's done it without much thought. There's been absolutely no thought in the kind of tariff increases that he's brought about. And if you want one example, it's the poor kingdom of Lesotho, who makes Calvin Klein jeans and who makes Calvin Klein products and who makes Levi's products. And suddenly this poor kingdom of Lesotho has been hit with 50% tariffs, for no reason at all. Yes, maybe they can reposition their factories, whatever it is, but there's a craziness about this. And the problem is that Trump is playing chicken. He does not want to listen to by advisors, not his inner circle, but even advisors within his own administration and economists, strategists, observers, journalists, economists around the world are telling him that this is crazy, but he doesn't want to blink. He just wants to, he doesn't want to admit that it's wrong or retract. And that's why we have this crisis.
Well, David, because many of people may not have been able to see the slide, it may have been. So let me just talk about that. When COVID happened on the 19th of February 2020, the market dropped. The initial fall was 34.32%, and 22 days later, the market had recovered 24.4, and 63 days later, 33.71. So the market had nearly recovered. If we look at the crisis in 2008, the market dropped 33.38%. The market was up 22 days later on that drop figure of 7.35 and 10.9. And let's even go further. Let's go to the Cuban Missile Crisis in 62, where the market dropped 9.4. It was up 15% 22 days later. And 90. So the whole concept is understanding that this is not the time to panic. But let me move on to other questions for you, David. I've got many for you today. So I've actually decided not to take any of the emails that people sent me over the last month, because so much changed in the last week. David, you make the point that Trump's performance on Wednesday has sparked alarm, anger, frustration amongst a broad spectrum of business and political leaders. Concerned about the potential long-term consequences about his tariff policy. So let's just talk about the long term. Maybe this is a negotiating technique, but David, you've got portfolios, you've understood them, you've evaluated them over the years. Are there any stocks that are really going to benefit, and are any stocks that are really going to now be affected so badly that you may need to rebalance portfolios because there are better opportunities where we are today than we've been previously?
No, this is just a tsunami. This takes out everything. This takes out the US economy. I want to just answer, when you spoke about COVID, when you spoke about other crises, what happened, and certainly in the COVID, why did the markets respond in COVID, is because the Fed and governments came to the assistance of the economy. Everybody was sheltered at home, but they gave them plenty of money, which is actually still in circulation. There was action by the Fed, there were action by governments. In this case, it's the government that's causing it. It's Trump, and the Fed can't do anything. If you listen to Jay Powell on Friday, he's waiting because he doesn't know the consequences. And I want to, Bryan, at the moment it's sentiment. There is no evidence of inflation going up. It's only the prospect of inflation going up. It's only fear of inflation. It's only fear of economic issues happening. So there's no tangible proof that anything is wrong at the moment. And that's why the Fed is stuck. They're going to wait to see what the consequences of this are before they start reducing rates. Trump is trying to force them into reducing rates. Crisis, you've got to reduce rates. Powell's saying no. At this stage, there's no reason to do so. The job numbers were pretty good and so on. So this is all in the hands of Trump. If Trump blinks, if he takes a step backwards, this market will do exactly what you said the other markets will do. It'll recover pretty fast because the businesses as we stand now are still in very, very good shape. But, and I'm just going to give you the but before because I'm sure it's going to come in. If he continues like this, he can trash confidence. In other words, he can bring to an end people. By confidence means that they start to withdraw from projects, from contracts, from buying new machinery, from employing new people. So that in itself can be a very destructive force, if you understand what I'm saying. So if he continues like this, he can shatter confidence, and then it's going to be very difficult to come back from the real, from this fall. So we're at a very delicate balance, which lies in one man who on the weekend was on the golf course.
David, you've always had great confidence in Warren Buffett. And you know,
Yes.
I always say to people, don't read all the articles. Have a look who the author is, because everyone's giving their own opinion. But Warren Buffett is a man you have great confidence in. He made the
Yes.
point that this is tantamount to an act of war.
Yes. In other words, you're probably meaning a war on the world. You know, he's already declared war on Canada. He's declared war on Mexico. He's declared war on all his allies, on Europe. And that's another major problem, is that if he would have been a little more tactful in negotiating and got people round the table and said, look, this is where America is, you know my views. But instead, he comes out on Wednesday night with rape, plunder, pillage. You know, we've been ripped off. Now, you can't go to a negotiating table with those kind of attitudes. You know, automatically the people at the other end are angry. You know, if you call someone, you've ripped us off, you know, you go into negotiations, then it's going to be bitter. So a lot of the damage has to do with his, with his views. And he has, you know, it's previous presidents. It's not only Democrats that might have ripped off, and I'm putting that in inverted commas, but it wasn't a rip-off. I mean, this has happened since the Second World War, where America needed to rebuild other economies. And so it's gone on, you know, over years and years. This order that we see now is not overnight. This has been built up over many, many years. So you can't unravel it in one night or in 2 nights or in 2 days, whatever.
Okay,
So
David.
you've got to give it time.
Okay, we're gonna take a break, but when we return, I want to ask you how, you know, you spoke about the job numbers, and I just want to ask you how you see the word recession, because I talk about fear and greed, and now all of a sudden no one even knows what a recession means, but everyone is talking about recession.
Okay.
So we're going to stay tuned. We're going to take a break. Stay tuned.